There is a kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from doing too much. It comes from feeling too much, from carrying emotions that were never yours to hold. You might recognize it, that quiet heaviness at the end of the day, even when nothing particularly difficult happened. The sense that your body is tired, but sleep doesn't quite reach it, as if something inside you never fully rests. This kind of tiredness has nothing to do with weakness, and it has nothing to do with being too sensitive. It comes from a life spent listening, absorbing, holding space, from being the one who understands. Maybe it started early, before you even had language for it. You learned to read the room before you learned to read yourself. You noticed shifts in tone, silences that meant something was wrong, faces that needed reassurance before words were spoken. You became attuned not because you wanted to, but because it felt necessary. Somewhere along the way, empathy stopped being something you felt and became something you performed. You learned that being aware of others' emotions kept things calm, that anticipating needs prevented conflict, that carrying a little extra weight made everything feel safer. And so you carried it, quietly and consistently. At first, people praised it. They told you that you were understanding, that you were a good listener, that you were always there. Maybe you felt proud of that role, or maybe you didn't feel much at all, only a vague sense that this was who you were supposed to be. What no one mentioned was the cost. The way your own feelings slowly blurred into the background, the way your needs became harder to identify, the way rest began to feel undeserved unless it was earned through emotional labor. You didn't just empathize, you absorbed. Over time, the signs appeared, subtle at first, a constant low-level fatigue, irritability without a clear reason, a strange emptiness where joy used to land. Decision-making became exhausting, not because you didn't know what you wanted, but because you were so used to prioritizing what others needed, that your own voice felt faint. Sometimes you felt anxious without knowing why. Other times, numb. You told yourself it was normal, that everyone feels this way, that this is just what it means to care deeply. But something inside you knew this was different. Because this wasn't just empathy, this was perpetual empathy, an unbroken state of emotional availability, a nervous system that never fully powered down, a quiet vigilance that scanned for discomfort before it scanned for joy. You didn't wait to be asked. You sensed. And once you sensed, you couldn't unfeel it. Other people's sadness became your responsibility. Their stress lived in your chest. Their unresolved pain followed you home. You told yourself you were being kind, but kindness slowly turned into obligation. Saying no didn't feel like a boundary. It felt like cruelty. You worried about disappointing people, about abandoning them, about what it would mean if you stopped being available. So you stayed. You listened longer than you wanted to. You gave more than you had. You became the safe place for others while quietly becoming unsafe for yourself. There is a particular loneliness that comes with this role, because when you are always the one who understands, people rarely ask if you do. They assume you're fine, that you can handle it, that you don't need the same care you so freely offer. And over time, you start to assume that too. You stop reaching out, not because you don't want connection, but because you don't want to burden anyone with your weight. You've been carrying theirs for so long. At some point, empathy stops feeling like a choice. It feels like a reflex, an identity, something that defines your worth. You may not even remember who you were before you learned to be this way, before empathy became survival. Because for many people, perpetual empathy doesn't come from abundance, it comes from adaptation, from environments where emotional awareness kept you safe, where being attuned meant avoiding conflict, where anticipating others' needs prevented things from getting worse. You learned that being needed was safer than being honest, that being useful was safer than being visible, that being understanding was safer than being vulnerable. So you became very good at it. Too good. And now you live with the consequences, a body that stays tense even in quiet moments, a mind that replays conversations, searching for what you might have missed, a heart that feels heavy but doesn't know how to ask for relief. You may even feel guilty for feeling this way. After all, empathy is supposed to be a good thing. But no one talks about what happens when compassion has no boundaries, when it becomes constant, when it becomes compulsory. This isn't about blaming empathy. It's about noticing what it has been carrying with it. the unspoken agreements you made with yourself, the parts of you that learned to disappear quietly, the needs that went unnamed because there was never room for them. Somewhere along the way, empathy stopped being a bridge and became a weight. You might still care deeply, you might still feel intensely, but perhaps for the first time, you're beginning to notice that not all empathy comes from love. Some of it comes from fear, from habit, from old patterns that once kept you safe. And noticing that doesn't make you selfish. It makes you aware. There is no solution offered here, no steps to follow, no promise of transformation. Only this recognition. Not everyone who gives endlessly does so because they are strong. Some give because they learned, long ago, that being emotionally available was the price of belonging. And maybe the weight you feel is not a flaw in who you are, but a signal, a quiet one, waiting to be heard.